Mel.
Hey, look at everybody.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this. I'm going to ask everyone mute their microphones, please. And we will go ahead and start. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Tonight's talk will focus on salvage work at the Joy Creek Major Site, which is a Mill Creek village that suffered from repeated floods in 2019. We'll also discuss the Dixon Site in Oneota Village. Cherie will present her faunal analysis results from these two sites. Cherie is the educational programmer at Iowa Office of the State Archaeologist. She holds a master's degree in anthropology from the University of Kansas. Her research interests include fauna analysis, rock art, lithics, and environmental adaptation. Her research focuses on the Great Plains. Please keep microphones muted till the end. It will have a question and answer session, and you can also write in the chat as she goes through the presentation. And I will now mute my microphone and welcome Cherie to present her research.
That are able to provide immunizations to patients.
Hi, I think we're set. Yeah, I think Quinn mentioned it, but if you have questions that come up while I'm talking, if you want to go ahead and just write them into the chat, Quinn will monitor the comments and questions in the chat, and that way we can, something pops into your head, you could go ahead and do it. So I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen. Okay. So as Quinn mentioned, I'm going to talk about the animal remains from two different late prehistoric sites. One of them is the Dixon Site, 13WD8, and the other one is the Joy Creek Major Site, which is 13PM7. The Dixon Site is a Correctionville phase Oneota Village site. It's on the Little Sioux River in Woodbury County. This is one of, this excavation was done in 2018, 2019. This was a formal block excavation that was sponsored by the DOT. The Little Sioux River is rapidly eroding the side of the site, and the DOT stepped in to save the site by dumping riprap along the riverbank there. But in the process of getting their big trucks down in there with the riprap, they knew that they were going to do site damage. So we did a block excavation. Actually, 3 big block excavations were done there. There are radiometric dates from this site that suggest that it was occupied for 60 or 70 years, around between 1300 and 1400. The 3 large blocks were excavated by a professional crew with some well-trained volunteers over a period of 10 weeks. This is interesting to me because the PM7, the Joy Creek Major Site, was a salvage operation, and it was done only over a weekend. But at Dixon Site, we had 3 blocks with a number of features in each block, and the features, of course, contain lots of bone. More than 16,000 bone fragments were recovered. Here are examples of some of the features. You can see these are trash-filled storage pits. They originated probably as food storage, but then as they were emptied, then they were filled up with trash. And that makes a wonderful little time capsule for the archaeologists. This picture in the upper left, you can, whoops, go back. You can see up here, this is a cross section of one of the pits that's been exposed by the river erosion. So standing right down here at the edge of the river. And so this was the reason that the site had to be excavated and protected. So from all of those mammal bones, this is the list of the taxon that were identified. To give you a clue on some of the codes over here, NISP is the number of individual specimens, And the MNI then is the minimum number of individual animals that's represented. So if I have 123 bison bones, but what I had was 10 right scapula, which tells me that there were at least 10 animals represented by those 123 bones. So I have worked out all these calculations for the major animal identified at the site. So for this illustration, then we'll show you the summary of the major food species that were identified here. We had lots of smaller critters, the gophers and the moles and things like that, most of which were probably invasive. They like to get into those trash-filled storage pits and rummage around, eating the seeds and gnawing on the bones and things as well. But the primary food species then comprised bison, canids, deer, beaver, pronghorn, and elk. And this pronghorn caught our attention because they are not, they're rare to non-existent in Northwest Iowa. It's not out of the realm of possibility. In the historic records, one single pronghorn antelope has been reported from Western Iowa. But today, the historic distribution of pronghorns is much farther west. The fact that there is a pronghorn element at this site, there's actually two elements, suggests that perhaps people were traveling west onto the plains to do some of their bison hunting and bringing back something like pronghorn along with it. This is supported by the fact that bison elements are disproportionately represented. I have a lot of the meat-bearing bones of bison. Do not have a lot of the feet. There are some things that are feet, parts of the animal that don't have a lot of utility. And often if you're having to transport a 2,000-pound bison a long distance, you will get rid of a lot of those elements that you don't want to carry back. The fact that we do have all of the skeleton represented, at least to a minimum level, suggests that they were also hunting bison in the immediate vicinity of the site. We have some artiodactyls, we have elk and deer, and both we have samples of those, the unshed antlers. So you can see here that there's still part of the skull is attached to this elk antler here, and the same thing with this deer skull from an earlier excavation at the Dixon site. And these suggest that unshed antlers would suggest kills during the fall or the early winter before the animals had shed their antlers. Canids, very common at the Dixon site. We had lots of canids. Most of them are the size of coyotes. This would be a small animal between 40 and 50 pounds, probably. This was the majority of the animals. There were 4 specimens that you can see here in the top, 2 of them, that were significantly larger than coyote size. So these are dog coyote size specimens on the bottom, and then there's this big critter up here. And these were classified as dog or wolf. And then there was one small one, which is probably the size of a fox. And this one I suspect probably is a fox. It's very difficult to identify the difference between a wild canid and a domestic dog unless you have the skull or the mandible. The mandibles that we have suggest to me that most of these animals, especially the dog coyote sized ones, are domestic dogs. As people domesticate dogs, we tend to select animals with shorter noses. And just like as humans, our faces have changed shape over the millions of generations, and most of us don't have room for our wisdom teeth anymore. Dogs are facing the same problem. Their tooth row gets crowded. You can see these teeth here are starting to twist in and are overlapping each other. And the third molar is actually getting pushed up onto the ascending ramus of the mandible. And you can see here in this shot down below that it's almost non-existent. This is the vestigial tooth. It has no deep roots. In some domestic dogs from Native American sites, that third molar is missing altogether. We can also measure the length of the carnassial. This is the big meat shearing tooth that dogs have, their first molar. And the ratio of the length of the carnassial tooth to the entire tooth row changes because the tooth doesn't change size as the tooth row is shortened. And so the ratio between the carnassial tooth and the rest of the tooth row all fall within the range of domestic dogs. So I'm willing to suggest that most of the canids at the Dixon site are domestic animals. We have some indirect evidence for that as well. A full 20% of these animals were butchered for food. You can see here we've got cut marks on canid mandibles. Here is an impact blow where somebody intentionally smashed it, probably to gain access to the marrow in the cavity. And I can honestly say that the dogs ate my assemblage too. A large number of the other bones at the site have been gnawed on by canids. This particular one has actually been all the way through somebody's digestive system. It's been chewed on, and then it's been etched by stomach acids. A large number of the other bones all have evidence of gnawing by canines on it. And this suggests to me that dogs were at the site. They were either being fed leftover bone or they were just being allowed to rummage around through the garbage before it was disposed of. So I'm suggesting that most of those canids at the Dixon site are domestic dogs. Even the big one, there's at least one very large dog, the dog wolf-sized animal. But when we look at the bones of his neck vertebra, we see that he has a pathology here. This suggests that either this animal lived to a ripe old age, which is unusual in wild animals and more common if somebody is taking care of it. Or it may also suggest that this dog carried a heavy load. And we know that Native Americans' dogs did help pull loads. They carried travois, they carried bundles on their backs and things like that. So having a travois with the weight here resting on the dog's shoulders might be responsible for the pathology on this. So I'm suggesting that even that big dog, a big canid at the site, is probably also a domestic animal. Beyond food, I mean, nobody is really particularly surprised to find that somebody in Western Iowa is hunting a lot of bison and deer. I might add here, we did all of the fauna from the Dixon site. I took a look at, but today I'm only talking about the mammal bones because I only have the mammals from the Joy Creek site. The PM7 site, the bird bones are being pulled and another specialist is going to be doing those. So today we're only focusing on birds or on mammals and not the birds and the fish and things like that. But I also found some other fun bones at the Dixon site that have culturally symbolic roles. These are not necessarily food. So I turned to the ethnographic literature. The Oneota, who were living at the Dixon site, are ancestors of the Iowa, the Oto, the Missouri, the Ponca, and the Ho-Chunk. So we can look at ethnographic evidence from these known tribes who are descendants of the Oneota and try and see if we can learn a little bit more about some of the uses that they put animals to beyond food and your basic necessities. I relied a lot on Lance Foster's work. Lance did a lexiconography of Iowa and Oto zooarchaeology. He made lists of animals that were considered edible and non-edible. And he also examined a number of sacred bundles of the Iowa as part of his master's thesis research. I also looked at Alanson Skinner's ethnographies of the Iowa as well. One of the things we did have at the Dixon site are mountain lions. I found several mountain lion claws, and previous work at the Dixon site had also identified mountain lions. According to Foster, mountain lions are not on the Omaha list of edible animals. This is not something that you put on the table. However, they are very symbolic because of they're ferocious, they're powerful, they're stealthy, they're magnificent hunters, and so they were important symbolic animals. In fact, there are stories, Iowa stories, where young men who were looking for their vision quest as they became adults would sleep on a mountain lion hide in order to have the kind of dreams that they were hoping for to develop their skills as hunters. And occurrences of animals found in sacred bundles of the Iowa include both cougar and the underwater panther, which is a mythological beast, and which are probably represented also by mountain lion bones. There's also bobcat represented at the Dixon site. These are on the Omaha list of edible animals, but they also play a symbolic role. Bobcat is a character in Iowa Oto stories, and their skins were used to rest calumet and gourd rattles on during certain ceremonies. So the presence of the bobcat elements at the site might have been a food source, it might have been something for the fur, and it might have played a role in a symbolic role in the culture of the people there. We also found a lot of carved bone artifacts, which are just an inkling of some of the cool stuff, the other things that people could do with bones. Bone can be carved much like wood can, but it's harder and stronger and lasts longer. So we have this bead or ornament. Sometimes you can see the failures of these things where they tried to do a groove and snap to break the thing and it didn't break cleanly. But we have incised decorations on these. We have long, thin bone pins, which might have been used in regalia or in dressing. There were a number of these small, round carved bone discs, use unknown. I would suggest that they might be used in games as dice or as counters or something like that. And this small carved object, it's very tiny, only about 1 centimeter long. I'm thinking that it might be if you see bone fish hooks. They often have a little knob like this on the end that served to help attach a string to the fish hook. So that might be what this is as well. So we see the fact that bones were used in ornaments and regalia and games. And to sneak the birds in here too, we did find the Pyga style of an eagle at this site as well. And that's the very tip end of the bird's spine. And that bone is attached to the tail feathers. So if you skin a bird or take the tail feathers, most often that bone will be attached to the tail. So this suggests, again, eagles they have a great deal of symbolism because of their power. And so having an eagle Pyga style suggests that they were also probably collecting these tail feathers for fans or regalia. So that's the Dixon site. Now, if we go to the Joy Creek Major site, it's nearby. It's just one county north of Woodbury County. This one is in Plymouth County on the Big Sioux River. The artifacts associated with this site are from the Big Sioux phase of the Mill Creek culture. And that phase has been dated to about AD 1100 to 1250. So this is 100 years or so older than the Oneota site at Dixon. These dates are for this Big Sioux phase. They are not from artifacts at PM7. So that's just an estimate here. In 2019, their OSA received reports that this site had been flooded. The dike broke, And the site was flooded not once, but 3 times over the course of 2019. Those of you living in Western Iowa probably remember the fun and games of the floods. But they were reported that the site had been disrupted. Megan Meserole went out to there and was able to identify the fact that there were indeed things that needed to be salvaged. There were the disturbed burials there. And so in the June of 2019, later in the year of 2019, a crew went out from OSA, volunteers, all professionals and well-trained volunteers, to see what they could do, what was left of the site, and if there was anything they could do to do recovery. What they discovered was, although the site had been washed with these floods, a lot of things seem to remain in place. And you can see here in this top left-hand picture, here's an articulated section of a bison backbone. This has not been damaged by the flood. You'd think that if flood waters washed across here, these bones would be completely discombobulated. But there they are, still articulated together. And they were able to identify a number of these features. The features have been collapsed. The soil has been washed out from within and the artifacts collapsed down, but they were still able to identify intact features. There were some places where our artifacts had obviously been moved from the breach and the dike. You could see where they'd been washed across and deposited in the lower area, but a lot of the features still remained intact. So working over a weekend, a period of 3 days, this crew managed to identify 86 features and collected more than 14,000 mammal bones. As I say, I haven't seen the fish or the birds and the mussel shells, all of which I know are also there. Those are going to other experts to be analyzed. But here you can see the river here to the left of the picture, and the dike that was damaged by the flooding. Ken and John Kavami from the University of Arkansas did a gradiometry survey of the site. This is a remote sensing thing. And sometimes gradiometry things are kind of like reading Rorschach tests, but it doesn't take a lot of imagination to be able to identify an enclosure at this site. You can see it's got bastions on the corners and in the middle. So there is, this part of it's been damaged down in the bottom left-hand corner, but a lot of this is still intact. It's still a lot of valuable information available on this site. So I am actually still working on the bones from this site. So I have not I haven't gone through all the boxes yet, and I haven't calculated the minimum numbers of individuals represented, but you can see it's very similar to what we were seeing at Dixon. Bison, deer, elk are the most common. The butchering technique used at PM7 consists of taking large heavy rocks and smashing the bones into little pieces. So I have a very large category of bison / elk. When you break ribs up into enough small pieces or long bones into enough small pieces, it's really difficult to tell whether it's a bison or an elk. I also have black bear canine teeth. So it's possible that some of those big smashed up long bones might also be bears. Again, we have dog coyote and dog wolf sized animals. At least some of them are identifiable as dogs. Beavers, otters, badgers, raccoons, and a lot more of the smaller animals. So to use the exact same graphic that we used for Dixon, again, bison would produce, they're the most abundant animal, and they're certainly the largest and would provide the most meat as a food resource. Deer are the next most common, and then elk. No antelope here yet. quite a number of canines, beavers, and then quite a much more common are these small mammals, things like rabbits and raccoons, and the larger ground squirrels, the Franklin ground squirrel. So it looks like perhaps they were utilizing more of these small critters as well. So here are the two sites in relationship to one another. You can see that they're not far apart physically in distance. As I say, PM7 is a few hundred years older, and they are two different culture groups. One is Oneota, and PM7 is a Mill Creek site. We divide up the occupations of the late prehistoric period. These different groups of people use different pottery styles. They arrange their villages differently. They built different kinds of house styles. So archaeologists have given them separate names to identify the different culture groups. Everybody living out here in northwestern Iowa was using all of the habitats in the immediate area, including the water, they have aquatics, and the prairie grasslands and forest edge communities. So we see both the grasslands, the prairies, the bison, and we see forest edge animals such as deer and elk. There he is, the werewolf of Plymouth County here. There is one really big dog out there, a big canine. You can see this is a coyote femur, and this is the critter from PM7. It's significantly larger. Here's one of his foot bones. I've also found some of his teeth. He's a very large canine. I don't know if this is a wolf or a domestic animal. It was an impressive critter. I wouldn't have argued with him. A number of the animals are also butchered. Again, you can see the cut marks. And there's almost no evidence of carnivores gnawing on the bones at this site. The Dixon site, they were chewing on everything. At PM7, the bones seem to have been disposed of into these pits very quickly. They are in good condition. They don't look like they've been exposed on the surface. They aren't weathered. They aren't cracked. Some of them are in almost pristine condition. So the dogs were not getting at them at this site. Yeah. But you can see that some of the bones are definitely domestic canines. This one, not only is the third molar being shoved onto the ascending ramus, but the second molar is as well. So these animals have the shortened noses and are diagnostic of domestic animals. I don't have whole tooth rows from this site, so I can't give you the ratio of the tooth row to the carnassial bone, carnassial tooth. But to me, it's good evidence that this particular species, that there are domestic animals here as well. Also in these pit features are some really amazing articulated sets of bones from this site. This is one feature, which is loaded with animal bones, but here is the last cervical vertebra, the C5, and the first 6 thoracic vertebra. These all articulate together. I've got, you can see these are the thoracic vertebra on a buffalo. If you look down here in the bottom corner, the thoracic vertebra are the ones with the very tall spines that support the bison's hump. A common routine observed in lots of places on the plains is to break these things right off at the base of the spine. And you can see that's been done on all of these thoracic vertebra. And this removes the hump meat to be taken off and processed separately. They also then broke the ribs. The ribs are also attached to the thoracic vertebra. And these things were broken off just below where they attach. Here you can see the little facets right there where the ribs attach to the bone. But instead of cutting them loose here, they were breaking them along the base. And you can see that the heads of all these ribs have been cut off. But this is an entire unit of a single animal. And to me, the fact that this site has been disturbed by flooding and these things still are intact like this is very interesting. I'm seeing lots of other combinations like this. I have 5 articulated cervical vertebra, the neck of an animal. I have sections of radius and ulna and humerus that all articulate together. This suggests to me that this is what we call a heavy butchering strategy. Animals were being brought back to the site almost intact or in large sections, and they were then being butchered at the site, and the elements being disposed of in one lump into the pits. So they are bringing back whole sections of bison here, which suggests that they're not being brought in from too far away. If you were out in Montana killing buffalo, you would strip the meat from the bones. You might save some of the most highly useful bones, marrow bones or scapula that you want to use for tools, but you would leave the rest behind. The one interesting thing I can say from PM7 is I do not have any bison skulls. I have 1 horn and 1 mandible, and that's it for all of the bison bone. So doing something different with bison skulls. I'm not sure what. It was either somewhere else at the site or they're being used for some other purpose somewhere else, or they were left behind at the kill site. The skulls are very heavy and would be hard to transport. So it's possible that they were left behind. There are no whole marrow bone bearing bones at these sites. I take it back, there's 1 from PM7. I have 1 radius that wasn't broken open. But this is highly nutritious marrow, high in calories and fat, has a lot of important vitamins. This is a really useful food source, especially in the wintertime when people are not getting fresh greens. If you don't eat your veggies, you can get a lot of these vitamins and iron from eating animal marrow. The bones are also smashed up. The reason I can say I've examined 16,000 bones or 14,000 bones, it's the fragments. I've counted a lot of tiny fragments. If you smash up the bones and boil them, just like using soup bones today, the grease comes out of the bone. And then if you set the pot aside and as it cools, the grease will coagulate on top. And then you can lift it off. You can use it for cooking. You can use it for making pemmican or things like that. So reducing bones to small pieces that will fit into your pot is a good sign that they were also manufacturing bone grease. These 2 specimens in this picture, you can see these are lovely evidence of the impact fracture. Somebody pounded it right there, and you can see how the cracks then spiral away from it. And again, this humerus too, you can see the impact blows are actually individually visible. Again, at Dixon Site at PM7, we have skulls with unshed antlers, suggesting that there were at least some fall and early winter kills. And tails. This is kind of fun. We have good evidence of hide processing activities in the features at PM7. One of them is caudal vertebra from the tails. I have both deer and bison tails. So when you skin an animal, removing the hide, you can see here the tail goes along with the hide. And usually the tailbones are still in it. But when the time comes to process that hide to make clothing, to make shoes, to whatever you want to use that animal skin for, you're going to remove that tail and those bones will end up in the trash pits. So here we have some evidence here. We have articulating bison tails. And you can see here that there are cut marks and butchering marks on them too. So they were being removed from that hide so that the hide could be used for something else and tossed into the pits. I also have evidence of the tools used in hide processing. We have 4 hide fleshers. We have a hide grainer, and it even has red pigment on it. And so far, 22 bone awls. So here is a metatarsal, a bison leg bone that has been made into a fleshing tool. This is used to scrape the goo off of the inside of a hide or the hair off of the outside in the early stages of preparing this for tanning. Here are a few others. This one's made on a tibia. This one is made on a deer metatarsal, and this one we'll never know what kind of bone that one was made on. You can see they're fairly common at the site, especially around good old feature 86. Here is a hide grainer. This is the proximal end of a bison humerus. This is not the part of the bone that has marrow in it, but it has this really rough cancellous tissue, which was used in part of the final processing for animal hides. And as you can see, this one, in spite of the flooding, still retains red pigment embedded in the pores on this bone. And it was probably used to apply red pigment to a hide as it was being finished. So this is part of the finishing stage. And awls, lots and lots of awls from PM7. Some of them complete. This one is complete. This one is complete. This is just a sample of the 22 awls. I couldn't squeeze them all into one slide. Many of them are broken, little snap, their tips have snapped off, but they're all very sharp pointed. And these are probably also being used to work hides. This is when you're starting to do the sewing stages of things. You're perforating the hides. There are also some way cool symbolic artifacts from PM7. I've got bear canines and I've got elk canines. Elk, back in the day, the canine teeth of elks were actually tusks. And so these teeth are vestigial tusks. They're the only artiodactyl that still has tusks in North America. They're small now, but this is actually ivory. And they were valued by Plains Indians, historic Plains Indians. They sewed them especially on women's dresses. The men would sew them on bags, especially bags that contained their tobacco or other things that they used in ceremonies. They are symbolic of wealth. They were used as good luck symbols. Bear teeth are also commonly used in regalia. You see necklaces and things like that, or you see them sewn onto clothing. None of these are perforated. So I can't say for sure that they were being used in regalia, but their presence suggests to me that they were being obtained intentionally. Other Carvebone artifacts. This intact whistle, this is another one of those miraculous finds on a poor site that had been flooded so many times. This is made onto a swan humerus, but it's a complete whistle. The only thing it lacks is the fipple on the inside. We also have some examples of carved bone. This bone has been thinned, it's been cut. There are 3 or 4 of these thinned bones, and this one has a bit of an incised decoration on it with, you can see 3 small circles on there, gesundheit. And these are probably some sort of ornaments, wristbands or armbands or something like that. So we have some good evidence of symbolic use for bone as well at PM7. This is a Carvebone artifact. You can suggest as well as I can what it might have been used for. This might be like those little round gaming pieces from the Dixon site. It might be something that was not finished. We don't know the use of something like that, but it's been carefully cut. The edges are all rounded and smoothed. Don't know the use. So thank you. That's a summary there of 2 huge faunal collections that are really pretty fun. If you doubt that beaver can be eaten, that's what is going on in that picture. That's an Ojibwe demonstration of how you cook a beaver. But I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk. Everyone, if you just want to type in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask directly a question, we'll start our Q&A session right now. While people are thinking, I'll go ahead and chime in. So I recently did a test pit at the Dixon Site, and I'm starting to analyze what we found, what we recovered. And it looks like we had a hide grainer. So when I saw that pop up on the screen, I wrote that down, and I'm going to do more research on that. I didn't see any pigments on it, but do you have any advice for, do you look with a microscope, or I saw the red kind of paint on it?
Yeah, this one, it just leapt right out at you. Hide grainers weren't always used for applying pigment. They were used, it's especially sort of like suading, you know, roughing the surface, combing it. So down in Oklahoma and Kansas, they found quite a few of them, but they're not necessarily just for applying pigment. They were, but you can see that the cancellous tissue is flattened on the inside. You can see that there's been some wear from rubbing that onto a hide.
Okay, very cool.
Bell, what's it? From Oklahoma, you could see it. He talks about them and
Take a look at that. All right, we have some questions coming in. Could the smaller animals, bulls, gophers, be reflective of women hunting?
A lot of them are probably invasive critters, especially the moles at the Dixon Site. We could actually track the little devils. You'd find a rodent run in the site, and it would have little artifacts from the features in it. And if you followed that rodent run backwards in your excavation, you found the pit feature that he was coming out of and he was dragging things out of. So a lot of them are invasive. Sometimes you do, in the ethnographic literature, you see evidence of the little boys practicing their skills by hunting small birds and small rodents and things like that. Maybe the women, usually what I see there is the women when they're out gathering wild herbs and plants and things like that will grab turtles and things like that and throw them in the bag along with them. I haven't read too much about women actually doing hunting while they're out there. I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm not familiar with it from the ethnographic literature.
Here's another question. I think it's from the same person. Any other seasonal indicators at either site beyond the unshot antlers?
I am going to be really interested in looking at what they find from the fish. Mill Creek sites tend to build up almost a midden-like deposit, and it's suggested that they were occupied year-round. So I'll be interested to see what they find with the birds and the fish coming from PM7 site. At the Dixon site, one of the things that surprised me considerably was the fact that there are very few waterfowl. We had one swan, one coot. That was pretty much it. However, if you're out in Woodbury County during the migratory season, you practically have to kick the ducks and geese aside. They nest in every puddle, and body of water that they can find when they're migrating through there. And I'm like, why weren't the folks at the Dixon site hunting ducks? It was a surprise to me. I would suggest that either they weren't at the site during that season, during the migration season. Perhaps that was when they were wandering out into Nebraska on the high plains to do some bison hunting, or they were just very busy with their gardens and their crops and not hunting ducks. If you look at Oneota sites in Wisconsin and Minnesota, they've got lots and lots and lots of ducks. So it wasn't like they had anything against them. But that might also be an evidence of seasonality, that they weren't at the Dixon site during those major migration seasons.
Another question. Gail asks, was there anything unexpected that you found?
The antelope. Pronghorn was a surprise. I don't often find elk's teeth, the elk canine teeth, the ivory. So that was exciting for me too. PM7, raccoons, and the small mammals, that's a very distinctively different from the Dixon site. So that was interesting to me as well. They also have some fur bearers there like otters.
Another question, were any examples of textiles present?
No. Yeah, sadly, no hope for those surviving very well in the prehistoric record. Cord impressed pottery, so we know they had some cord, but
Oh, we just got a question. No pottery question mark.
lots and lots of pottery. Just not my bailiwick. So there are other people who are looking at the pottery. Yeah, there was a great deal of really lovely pottery collected from PM7 as well, and at the Dixon site. Also a lot of stone tools, but I haven't even begun to browse through those. The project for especially PM7 has been divided up under to a lot of experts who are looking at various aspects of it. We'll have to rummage through our collections and come up with our conclusions, and then get our heads together and talk about final conclusions on what an interpretation of the whole site. Hopefully we can, there might be money available to do a full-scale excavation. PM7 is such a fascinating site. Even after being inundated 3 times, there's still a lot of valuable information there. And hopefully it can get, we can do some excavations there before it gets flooded again. Kind of watching that river this spring.
Was there any evidence of ritual?
Well, we have ornaments and things like that were used for regalia, that were in things like the mountain lion and eagles and things like that. Those are all involved in regalia. So that's involved with regalia, symbolism, things like that. That's all part of ceremonialism.
From Kate, a few miles north of Dixon site, we have found evidence of larger population of Oneota. Would that have been an indication that the village site could have extended that far? Near south of Anton found several bones, including a bear jaw and bone tools.
There's quite an Oneota population in that area. So it's probably, the Dixon site was very large. But sometimes what we see with sites is if people go away and then come back to the same area, they don't come to necessarily back to the exact same spot, but to the same general area. So when you find a lot of house pits, you can't demonstrate for sure that, they're not all necessarily occupied at the same time. They might have been collapsed and built something else. So if we have when you have seasonal activities like that. They might have come back to the Little Sioux area in general, but not necessarily the exact same spot. So that makes it look like a much larger area. But there are quite a few large Oneota villages in the area. So it was pretty much probably a well-populated space area during that time period.
Okay, we have another question. Was there mussel shells on site?
Yes. And things made out of mussel shells. We were able to demonstrate there was a large shell bead, several centimeters long, from the Dixon Site that was made out of a freshwater mussel shell. So it could have been made on site. You could see the cool thing about it, it was drilled from both sides, and the thing eventually broke open. It was split in half, so we could see how it was drilled from both ends. There was wear on it that showed that it had been sewn onto something and it rubbed against it before it finally broke. But that was pretty interesting. That's the first time that actual freshwater mussel has been carved into beads. Often we find beads of from the Gulf of Mexico, ocean shells being traded in and used for beads in these late prehistoric sites.
Well, that is the last question I have right here. Any last chance? Anyone else want to ask anything else? Okay. Well, we will end it there. Thank you so much. And we'll have this on YouTube available probably tomorrow. All right, everyone have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.